Just war theory, a traditional way of approaching the ethics of war, considers two topics. First topic, when is it okay to go to war? So, when's it okay to start a war? When's it okay to hop into a war? What makes it acceptable? That's one thing it concerns. Another thing just war theory concerns is how may a war be justly fought? So, one thing to consider, when's it okay to get in a war? Another question is, once you're in a war, how is it okay to fight in that war? What's on the table, what's not on the table? In the just war tradition, war is typically understood as not just any violence between groups, but a certain activity that occurs between two states. One of the conditions traditional just war theory has and takes to be required for a war to be just is that it's got to be sanctioned by the proper authority. We can call this condition PA. A war is just only if it's sanctioned by a proper authority. So if a proper authority says, yeah, go ahead and fight, it's time for war, I declare war, then you're in a war. If not, you're not. And in particular, forget about whether you're in a war or not. The real question is, for it to be just, the proper authority has to sanction it. Well, what is a proper authority? Proper authority in just war theory is the person or group with authority to speak for the state and who represents the state on the international stage. Sometimes this is called legitimate authority. So it's the person who's got authority to speak on behalf of the state, and the international stage recognizes it, or they represent them on the international stage. This raises a few questions. One question is, how do you get this kind of authority? How do you get proper authority? What makes you represent the state, speak for it, and represent it on the international stage? Well, it's a difficult question. One answer that people sometimes give is the social contract theory. The social contract theory, the gist of it is that everybody gets together, everybody in a state, and through some method or other, they agree to give someone authority. And so maybe this could happen through a democratic election. We all get together, we all vote for Biden, or we all vote for Trump, or it's mixed and the majority votes for one or another. And then through that election, Trump or Biden or whoever gets authority. Again, just war theory was developed and thought about in the context of war between states. You've got uniformed soldiers on each side, the red team and the blue team. They're roughly equally matched, often. And they're two states, and they have heads representing them. Maybe presidents, dictators, whatever. But sometimes war's different, especially in recent years and recent centuries. There's a different sort of war that still seems like war, but it doesn't quite fit into this picture. So think about the war on terror over the last 20 years. It's kind of sometimes presented as like war with the concept of terror. Anytime terror pops up, you gotta fight it. Sometimes it's presented as you're being at war with different non-state organizations. They're not states, they engage in territory, in terrorism, excuse me. And so the war on terror is an example of a war. Seems like a war, but it's not between states. Maybe there's states on one side and then terrorist organizations on another. Or think about the Civil War, or any sort of civil war. Sometimes military force is used by people who don't represent the state. Think about the people rebelling in a civil war. They don't represent the state they're rebelling against. Oftentimes this happens when participants who are rebelling, they don't feel like the current state, the current authority, their current government is legitimate. They don't feel like it represents them. And so again, this is a case where in some instances, in some civil wars, you've got non-state actors who are fighting against their own state. And so not every participant is a state with a representative. That being said, although there might not be state leaders, often these things have a leader. So think about the war on terror and think about Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. He wasn't the head of a state, but he was the head of a terrorist organization. Or think about, in some civil wars, there might be a leader that people coalesce around. So just war theory was formed in this context where you think about war as occurring between two states, and you think about war as the states having heads or representatives with proper authority to speak for the states, sometimes elected through democratic means. So a couple questions that pop up. Again, there's this difficult issue of what makes authority legitimate. Hard to say exactly, but it's got to be something to do with the people consenting to be ruled by the leader or the authority. Another thing to note is that proper authority talk, the role it seems to have in this discussion is to kind of carve out and separate out, okay, when is an act of force an act of war, and when is it a mere use of force? When is there a real war, and when are there merely two groups that are in violent conflict but aren't at war? Proper authority talk, among other things, seems to be an attempt to help us carve that out. And it's one of the conditions in order for a war to be legitimate, according to just war theory, is it can't just be that two states go to war with each other. It can't just be that two states are fighting. It's got to be that proper authorities on both sides say, okay, yeah, we're at war now. And you become a proper authority. Hard to say exactly how, but through some form of consent, maybe democratic elections are one way to do it.